Okay, I did not have time to put beautiful slides together for you today. I ran out of time. I do that a lot in the past. And so it's a good opportunity to pull your Bibles out and open them up. I'm going to give you the warning on that, or your phone apps or whatever, so you can maybe read some of the verses with me. Because I'm going to do some reading. We always like to do that. And actually, I'm going to start in the Parsha, and I'm going to start, which is Shemot or Exodus 13. It starts in verse 17, but I'm going to start reading in verse 19, and this is copied out of our Devar. And so Shemot 13, starting in verse 19. And Moshe took the bones of Yosef with him, for he had straitly sworn Bnei Israel, saying, Elohim will surely remember you, and you shall carry my bones up away from here with you. And they took their journey from Sukkot and encamped in Etam in the edge of the wilderness. And Yahweh went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them in the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, that they might go by day and by night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night departed not from before the people. Now, this in here, it talks about, this is, of course, the beginning of the Exodus, right? They're just now leaving Israel after being basically down there for 400 years. And, of course, Joseph was the one that saved them, 400 years before. And they came down to buy grain. And, of course, then they were invited down to Egypt and kind of got trapped there, so to speak, for about 400 years. And so here, 400 years later, they're coming out. And Joseph, 400 years ago, made them swear to say, hey, do not leave my bones here in Egypt. You are going to carry them out with you. So he definitely had a belief that that was going to happen, and he gave them instructions to do that. And so that's what we read here. In fact, I'm going to go back now and read where that occurred. Let's see. That would go back to Genesis chapter 50, which is near the end, by the way. Genesis chapter 50, verse 24 through 26. Should be a little fast. Genesis 50. Now I'm going to read out of my NESB here. And Joseph said to his brothers, I'm about to die, but God will surely take care of you and bring you up from this land to the land which he promised on an oath to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely take care of you, and you shall carry my bones up from here. So Joseph died at the age of 110 years, and he was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt. The end of Genesis, by the way. That is the very end of Genesis, is that prayer or direction or whatever you want to call it of Joseph for them to exit Egypt and to take his bones with them. Now I'm going to jump back to Numbers, but chapter, 13, 9. Well, we just read that. Our Parsha, which is Numbers chapter 13, 9, is 400 years later, right? I'm sorry, Exodus. Yeah. Exodus 13, 19. I want to put Numbers. I don't think we want to do Numbers. That was Exodus where we just read, right? But then I'm going to jump, let's see, that's 40, and then this is the beginning of the 40 years in the wilderness. Let's see. And then Moshe, after 40 years, Moshe, of course, dies just before they enter the promised land. And what we see is a continuation, I guess, of this theme, and so I kind of followed it through, which jumped me over to Joshua 24. So now I'm going to Joshua 24. And of course, Joshua is the one that brought them into the land after the 40 years of wandering, right? And this is now towards the end of the book of Joshua, and actually the end of his life as well. So Joshua 24, I'm going to read in 29 through 33. And it came about after these things that Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died, being 110 years old. Interesting, the same age, by the way. And they buried him in the territory of his inheritance in the Timnath Serah, which is in the hill country of Ephraim, on the north of Mount Gash. And Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who survived Joshua, and had known all the deeds of the Lord which he had done for Israel. Now they buried the bones of Joseph. Here we go. Now, it says, they buried the bones of Joseph, which the sons of Israel brought out from Egypt. They buried them at Shechem, in the piece of ground which Jacob had bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of money, and they became an inheritance of Joseph's sons. Last verse here, Eleazar, the son of Aaron, died, and they buried him in Gilbeth Penias, his son, which was given him in the hill of Ephraim. So they tacked on Eleazar there. But anyway, this is the end of Joshua, the book of Joshua, the end of Joshua's life, and they buried him. And it does say, I don't know, it seems to be that now was the time, about that time, that they also interred Joseph's bones. So they had them with them. I'm not real sure about this. Maybe somebody knows or can look it up. How old was Joshua in the wilderness? For some reason, I have it in my mind that he was about 40 years old when he started, 80 years old when he was done. He died at 110, so he was about 30 years in the land doing the conquering. I think that's about right, isn't it? I can't remember why I got that in my head because I couldn't find that, but I think that's about what it was. So around 30 years while they're doing the conquering, and then he dies, and then they inter Joseph's bones at that time. And it talks about Joseph now being buried where Jacob had bought the land in Shechem. And we see that if we go back to Genesis 33:17. A lot of connections here. We're going to go back to Genesis 33:17. 17 through 20. And Jacob journeyed to Sukkot. I thought that was interesting, by the way. This is Sukkot. It's not the same Sukkot that the nation of Israel is in. Where one of the first things we read here was they journeyed to Sukkot, right? It was one of the first stops that they made on the way out of Egypt. But that's a Sukkot down near Egypt. This Sukkot is a whole different Sukkot up in the land. It actually turns out there's 4 Sukkots named throughout Scripture. This is 2 of them. And so, anyway, Jacob journeyed to Sukkot and built for himself a house and made booths for his livestock. Therefore, the place is named Sukkot. Now Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, when he came to Paddan Aram, and he camped before the city. And he bought the piece of land where he had pitched his tent from the hand of the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. Then he erected there an altar and called it El Elohei Israel, which means mighty God of Israel. But that's the story here, where it says that he actually purchased this land from the Canaanites, because again, the Canaanites were everywhere. They were a small little family at this point, and it's at Shechem. And so, kind of thinking about people squabbling over who owns the land, who has inheritance of that land today, right? Hey, this might be the oldest deed in the history of the world. Is like we got an actual recorded deed here that hey, he owns that. The sons of Israel own that. I was thinking that might be the oldest one, but I thought maybe there's some writing on the pyramids or something to talk about older stuff, or on the Valley of the Kings in Egypt, maybe a little bit older, where they're claiming their.
Abraham one, that's the older one.
Is that older? Abraham also is recorded as buying. Oh.
From the children of Seth.
Yeah, where was that? It's not in Shechem.
It's down by, it's in the south.
It's further south, right? Okay, that would be the oldest one. All right. But anyway, they have claim to the land compared to maybe others today. Now, Shechem, referred to here, is in the modern day city. Actually, is called Nablus. So if you just Google Nablus, Israel, you'll be staring right at this area that they're talking about here, which is ancient Shechem. And it's right between 2 small little mountains. And actually, the 2 mountains is Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. And so, yeah, that's the same place that they were told to have this story that happens in the Exodus, right? After 40 years of wandering, they come in there, they cross over, and they talk about the curses and the blessings. Well, that's right there where the burial was. It never occurred to me. It's in the exact same spot. He brings them right back to the same spot for that event. Now, there's a place there in Nablus today they call it Joseph's Tomb today. It's 300 meters northwest of something they also call Jacob's Well. There's no certain archaeological evidence that that's for certain. But turns out this Joseph's Tombs is the second most holy site by the Samaritans today. Samaritans still exist. There's a small group, but they're there. Now that's in the West Bank, which is primarily outside of Israel's control. They do have some military control, I understand, of this guards, let's say, of Joseph's tomb. It's been desecrated a few times by those people, actually pretty recently too. Anyway, the Jacob's Well is about 300 meters, again, from this place. So there's a Jacob's Well there, which we don't know 100% that it's the exact same well, but if it's not, it's really, really, really close, which is, remember, the story where Yeshua talked to the Samaritan woman at the well. Right? And so, again, that's another place that we see where there's a connectedness here. Now, going back to our Parsha, we see that Elohim made them go backwards, right? So he led them out to Etam, and then we'll see that here in B. Actually, let's go read B, which is chapter 14. So now I'm back to Shemot, or Exodus 14, verse 1. And Yahweh spoke unto Moshe, saying, Speak unto Bnei Israel that they turn back and encamp before Pi-Hirot, between Migdol and the sea, before Baal Zephon. Over against it you shall camp by the sea, and Paro will say of Bnei Israel, They are entangled in the land, the wilderness has shut them in, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he shall follow after them. And I will glorify myself in Paro, and in all his hosts, and Mitzrayim shall know that I am Yahweh. And they did so. So yeah, Elohim made them go one way and then made them go right back where they were. Which seems to be the way that happens with us all the time, doesn't it? It seems like a waste of time. Wasn't this a waste of time? And also, they would feel defeated already, but that's exactly what Elohim wanted them to do. And so we should not be frustrated sometimes when we feel like we're going backwards. Maybe that's what Elohim wants you to do. And Pharaoh came to capture and kill them, and it seemed like Elohim had abandoned them. But fear not, right? So we feel that way in our lives a lot. Jump down now. This is Shemot, Exodus 14 in our Parsha. I'm going to jump down now to verse 13. And Moshe said unto the people, Fear not, stand still, and see the salvation of Yahweh, which he will work for you today. For whereas you have seen Mitzrayim today, you shall see them again no more forever. Yahweh will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace. Of course, this is even in our Devar, we say, Fear not, stand and see the salvation of Yahweh. The Hebrew for that is, I think, Yeshuat, right? Yeshuat, not Yeshuati. Yeshuat.
Right.
My Hebrew expert. What?
Salvation of.
Salvation of.
Yeah.
Okay, Elohim. Jumping down a few more verses. I'm now in 14, verse 21. And Moshe stretched out his hand over the sea, and Yahweh caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all the night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And Bnei Israel went into the midst of the sea upon dry ground, and the waters were a wall to them on the right hand and on to their left. Of course, this is a great event, recorded in Scripture, and it's loaded with symbolism. Of course, symbolism basic is about immersion, right? They're being immersed. It's a picture of salvation of Yahweh. And again, not just physically on this earth, but spiritually, and not just corporally, but individually. I'm not sure if Elohim ever commands us to specifically remember this event, but it is frequently remembered in Scripture. And I'm going to go look at a few of those, which again jumps us forward to Joshua. So yeah, again, this happened, and so 40 years later or sometime, Joshua now is in the land, or he's about to come into the land. And Joshua, let's see, Joshua 3:12. He says, "Now the sons of Israel again did..." What? No, I did it wrong. Hold on. Joshua. One book too far. They both begin with J's. Okay, yeah. It's in Joshua. I was in the wrong one. Yeah. Joshua. Oh, again. I'm going to go to Joshua 3:12. Joshua 3:12. I'm really struggling with that. Now then, take for yourselves. Now then, take for yourselves 12 men of the tribes of Israel, and it shall come about when the soles of your feet touch the dry ground. And it shall come about when the soles of your feet touch the priests carry the ark. The Lord of the earth shall rest in the waters, and the Jordan the waters shall be cut off, and the waters shall flow down above. Okay, this is how the Jordan actually was divided, by the way, which is kind of again a picture. It's not an actual remembrance of the 40 years before. But it is 40 years later, and a similar event does occur where the waters of the Jordan now are divided and they crossed over on dry ground. But it is also remembered in many places. One of the ones that I'm going to flip to is Psalms 66. Psalm 66, verse 6. It says, "And he turned the sea into dry land, and they passed through the river on foot. There let us rejoice in him." And there's a lot of Psalms actually that talk about this. I'm not going to go read them all, but I will give you a list of some of the Psalms that include this event. 18, 68, 74, 77, 78, 89, 106, and 136. Wow. But also, I'm seeing that in Nehemiah. Now remember Nehemiah. Does anybody remember the timing of that? Correct. So in Nehemiah, chapter 9, verse 11. So Nehemiah, chapter 9, verse 11. And yeah, the setting of Nehemiah is, they're in the land. Then there's 400-year period of judges or so, right? Then there's 400 period of kings, starting out with Saul and King and David and Solomon, and then they're divided, and then there's about 400 years of messiness. The Syrians attack the northern tribes, and then finally the Babylonians come and capture Jerusalem. They take them back for 70 years, and then, this is near virtually time-wise, chronology-wise, near virtually the end of the Old Testament, around 430 BC is about the last things that we see. There's some prophets that happen about that time, but they're coming back now to Israel after the 70 years in Babylon. And Nehemiah 9:11 says, "And they did divide the sea before them, and they passed through the midst of the sea on dry ground. And their pursuers thou didst hurl into the depths like a stone into the raging waters." This is actually part of Ezra's prayer. If you read that, there's a big prayer of Ezra. Again, about the end of the Old Testament, about 430 BC. And so there's a continuation through time to remember this event, and we're reading about it today. So I'm going to jump to here. Going back to our Parsha again, now to Shemot 15. It says, "Then sang Moshe And Bnei Israel the song unto Yahweh, and spoke, saying, I will sing unto Yahweh, for he is highly exalted. The horse and his rider he is thrown into the sea. Yah is my strength and my song. He has become my Yeshua. This is my Elohim, and I will glorify him, my father's Elohim, and I will exalt him. Again, this is the song of Moshe. We see again that Yahweh has become my Yeshua. I don't know if this one is Yeshua T. I don't know if it's conjugated that way, but that's why we kind of like some of the transliterations, because again, you see Yeshua's name being used effectively, although it's not his name, it's the word salvation, but his word, his, and we put the H, by the way, in our Devar, because the name, the place for salvation has the hey on the end, right? But the name, which is Yeshua, it just doesn't have the hey on it. So if you say it as a name, it's without the hey. But again,
Yeshua with the hay is an adverb. Yeshua without the hay is an adverb.
well, that's kind of what I said. Yeah, thanks. Okay. Did I read verse 3? Exodus 15, verse 3. Yahweh is a man of war. Yahweh is his name. So Yahweh is called a man, which is in Hebrew is Ish. He is in Ish, a man. A man of war, which certainly has symbolic meaning. But you could have said he makes war or he fights wars, which wouldn't necessarily make him a man. But we know that Yahweh has become Yeshua, a man. It kind of reminds me of my last drash, where Yahweh was called a man, especially in the story of Abraham in the tents of memory. If y'all remember that, that was. Okay. Hold on. So Elohim being in the form of a man is something that Jews try to dismiss, and especially when they interpret Isaiah 53. I've kind of been studying on that recently, partly because the Bat Zion website, did I mention this last week or last time I was here? The Bat Zion website received a book about that a few weeks ago. It was an ebook, so he just kind of sent the link to the ebook through the Bat Zion webpage, and well, it comes through in our email, so a couple of us get that forwarded. I chatted with the guy via email back and forth a bit, and actually sent him the PDF of my book, because once I had his email, I was able to PDF it. He seemed pretty grateful for that. And in fact, the guy's name is Lon. And so I'm just going to read something out of his ebook. And he says, Origen, which is one of these early 3rd century Christian fathers, so the Catholic Church and all these guys, kind of accept this guy as a church father. Origen mentions he debated with some unnamed Jews who presented the argument. This is actually from Lon's book, so I can't credit for this, and I can't confirm 100% that it's right. So just a warning on that. Lon Koenig is his name. Apparently he's up in Denver, or he's in Colorado somewhere, is what it said. And it doesn't sound like he had a Messianic congregation to attend either, where he's at. So Origen mentions that he debated some unnamed Jews who presented the argument that the servant of Isaiah 53 is collective Israel. And so that concept has been around since the 3rd century. Rabbinic sources up until the Middle Ages, this interpretation is not explicitly mentioned, though, in rabbinic sources up until the Middle Ages, where it now became, since then, the majority position. However, he lists, supposedly Wikipedia lists, according to him, the following Jewish sources that view the servant of Isaiah 53 as an individual, a man. Rabbi Akiva, in his Shlekim 5.1, Sotah, his 14a document, Sodia Gaon, Sanhedrin 98ab, Ruth Rabab 5.6, Midrash, Toldot 14, Yakut Shamoni, and the Midrash Tehillim 2.7. That's why I wish I had my notes, because I could show that to you instead of just babbling it off. But in other words, there was quite a few Jewish sources that agreed that Isaiah 53 is not collective Israel, but an actual individual man. The concept of Messiah coming as a man was so prevalent in the first century that there were several false messiahs. So do I have notes on that? Which I've got from this book from Lon. I'm going to read several of these false messiahs. He claims that Judah of the Galilee. Judah of the Galilee is mentioned in Acts 5:3. What? Let's go to Acts 5:3. Really? Acts 5:3? But Peter said, I get that right? Nope, Acts 5:37. I'm really struggling with numbers today. Acts 5:37. After this man, Judas of Galilee rose up in the days of the census and drew away some people after him. He too perished, and all those who followed him were scattered. This is also recorded here, according to Lon, by the Jewish general and historian. Mentions him a number of times. This is Josephus. He states that he incited his countrymen to revolt. This is reading of Josephus. This one is from the Jewish Wars. Incited his countrymen to a revolt, upbraiding them as cowards for consenting to pay the tribute to the Romans and tolerating them as rulers after having God for their Lord. He founded a sect known as the Zealots. I didn't know that. The Zealots were founded by this guy, having nothing in common with the others. Now, another one is mentioned again, actually in the book of Acts. It says 5:36. He says here, for some time, Theodas rose up, claiming to be somebody, and a group of about 400 men joined in him, and they were slain, and all who followed them were dispersed and came to nothing. Now, this is story for both of Judas and this Theodas is in this little speech that's given by Gamaliel. And at the end of this is where he says, hey, these guys rose up claiming to be Messiah, and they became nothing. And that's when he's saying, leave these Christians, leave these apostles alone, because if God is not with them, he says that. So, if God's not with them, it'll result in nothing. And of course, we see what happened. But that's why he's mentioning these guys. And this is the only place, which is Gamaliel's statement of this Thaddeus. We call him Thaddeus number 1, because there is a Thaddeus number 2, which is mentioned by Theodas, mentioned by Josephus. He writes of a different one. He says, and it came to pass, while Caspius Fadus was procreator in Judea, that a certain charlatan whose name was Theodas persuaded a great part of the people to take their effects with them and follow him to the Jordan River. For he told them he was a prophet, and he would by his word command, divide the river. Interesting, divide the river again, huh? And afford them an easy passage over it. Many were deluded by his words. However, Thaddeus did not permit them to take any advantage of his wild attempt, but sent a troop of horsemen out against them. After falling upon them unexpectedly, they slew many of them and took many of them alive. But they took Thaddeus alive and had his head cut off in Jerusalem. That's in Antiquities from Josephus. Another one is in Acts 21. In Acts 21. 38. Acts 21:38. Then you are not the Egyptian who some time ago stirred up a revolt and led the 4,000 men of the assassins out of the wilderness? Now this is the story here where Paul is being accosted by the Jews, and the Roman centurions are kind of trying to protect him. And so you can see here they're wondering, hey, this guy that they've got their hands on, they're saying, are you this Egyptian? Because they had heard about them. And this is an unnamed Egyptian, but Josephus mentions this guy apparently twice, this Egyptian. He says, moreover, there came out of Egypt about this time to Jerusalem one that said he was a prophet and advisor, and advised the multitude of the common people to go along with him to the Mount of Olives. as it was called, which lay over against the city and at a distance of 5 furlongs. He said further that he would show them from hence how, at his command, the walls of Jerusalem would fall down. And he promised them that he would procure them an entrance into the city through those walls when they were fallen down. Now when Felix was informed of these things, he ordered his soldiers to take their weapons and came against him with a great number of horsemen and footmen from Jerusalem and attacked the Egyptian and the people that were with him. He also slew 400 of them and took 200 alive. But the Egyptian himself escaped of the flight, but did not appear anymore. That's also in the Antiquities that Josephus wrote. We've heard about the Simon Bar Kokhba, right? This is around 132 AD. He actually had 2 revolts against Trajan in 115 and 132. It says Eusebius' initial victories, this is Eusebius, which was originally his name, led Rabbi Akiva to call him Bar Kokhba, the son of a star, a title taken from Numbers 24, a prophecy which referred to him as Messiah. And that's kind of the end of it. You don't see a lot of that. It kind of died down after Bar Kokhba. There was apparently someone up in the 1600s that claimed to be Messiah, according to this book. And then you had this other guy, Jacob Franklin, in the 1700s. But more recently, you have the Rabbi Schneerson, right? Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who kind of was the leader of the Lubavitcher movement, which is Chabad, in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, New York. And he died in 1994. But Schneerson began to be viewed as the Messiah as far back as 1965, of course, by those Jews that followed him in Chabad. Not wider body of Judaism, but many Chabad followers, this is according to him, many Chabad followers and other rabbis believe that Schneerson was resurrected and will return in power. Some believe he never really died, and some even believe he is God. Dr. David Berger says a substantial majority of the Chabad movement believe in the Rabbi's messiahship, even affirming that he is pure divinity. Another book I have on that Lon's book was primarily trying to address Isaiah 53, although it went into these other issues, trying to provide support of the fact that Elohim could come as a man, or the Messiah would be a man or an Ish. I've got another book that I've had for a while now. It's called Isaiah 53 Explained. This is written by a guy named Mitch Glasser. Actually, this is from the Chosen People Ministries, which I know I get some mail from these guys. I'm not sure 100% on their full theology. It seems like I've never been too aggravated by anything they've said that I read. I don't think I've read this book, though. If I read it, I probably would have put some marks in it. So I don't think I've read it yet. So I need this on my list to do. But Glasser, let's see, I found something while I was kind of researching this about something else about Glasser. Glasser is the guy that wrote this book. And when I was doing some studies on this, I got this document, I guess, off the webpage. I don't have a website for this. It says, Dr. Glasser noted a slightly different issue. He noted that between World War I and the Second World War, there was a great movement of Jews accepting Jesus, in other words, believing in Jesus, especially in Europe, where most Jews lived. This is according, again, to Glasser. There were hundreds of thousands of Jewish people who came to faith, but then the Holocaust came and destroyed the movement. This is the movement he's talking about, is Jews coming to faith in Jesus. I wasn't aware of this, so this is kind of news for me. And they died. They died in the Holocaust. They died, and that was the nexus of the Jewish life. But the nexus of Jewish life moved to the United States, according to him. So I looked a little bit more into this concept, and I found another website. Who are these guys? Jews for Jesus? He said, I had no idea that many of the Jews killed in the Holocaust were professing Christians. I was aware that many German Jews had converted to Christianity, especially beginning in the 18th century. The famed Jewish philosopher Moshe Mendelssohn initiated and epitomized the Jewish Enlightenment. However, 3 of his children became Christians, as did his most illustrious grandson, composer Felix Mendelssohn Bartholdy. Assimilation into the Christian or the church was the Jewish converts' expectation, based on universalism preached by liberal Protestant theology in the 19th century. However, Jews were forced to surrender their ethnic identity and their cultural distinctiveness in order to gain admittance to the church. This is like conversos, of course. You see the conversos, which I know Will is not here today. He was sick, I think, but he claims he's got the evidence of his family going back in Mexico as conversos, being from the Jewish. But that was kind of a requirement. During the 19th and the early 20th century, many Jews turned to Jesus as a Jewish Redeemer and the universal Savior, intermarrying with non-Jews and assimilating into German nation. Eventually, the German Christians cut the Old Testament out of their Bibles and exorcised the Hebrewisms out of their New Testament. Yet all the while, even in this poisoned theological atmosphere, Jews continued to profess faith in Jesus. Beginning in 1933, most Protestant clergy willingly accepted Hitler's racist views. The Edict of April 1933, called the Law of Restoration of the Civil Service, many Protestant clergy consequently agreed with the Nazi policy and chose to reject or eject all pastors who had Jewish parents or grandparents, or even great-grandparents. The church voluntarily Aryanized itself, immediately firing all the pastors of Jewish descent in 1933. By 1935, all congregates of Jewish descent were expelled. So again, these are Jews who kind of gave up their Jewishness. They weren't even keeping the Sabbath. They're doing church on Sunday with Christians. They basically converted, but yet the racism that existed within Germany in the 30s weeded them out, much like the Inquisition, right? That was part of what the Inquisition was about, right? Because they were converted Jews that were in the church, and they're thinking, no, these guys are secretly keeping the Sabbath at their house, and they're trying to get them to confess. That was a big part of what the Inquisition was about, right? So that this is not the first time that's happened. Points out that Hitler and other leading Nazis, despite their opportunist claims to the contrary, were hardly religious, but used Luther's anti-Semitic writings with scarcely a word of protest or contradiction from the leaders of the Protestant church. Jews left to themselves, Jewish Christians formed their own groups. Someone estimates that 1/10 of the Jews who had been interned belonged at this one of the camps. 1/10 of those Jews, he says, were professing Christians. Many Mosaic Jews and the Jews who had no faith whatsoever found Jesus and were saved in this camp. I am one of the few survivors from this concentration camp. The one who's writing this, I guess. This camp served as a window into what happened to Christians of Jewish descent during the Holocaust. It is estimated as many as 10% of the Jews in Nazi Germany believed in Jesus as the Jewish Messiah, and they suffered and went to their deaths along with their fellow Jews. So again, the gist of this is that by and large, at that time, the Jews who became to faith in Yeshua as Messiah probably didn't call him Yeshua. They became Christians. They went to church on Sunday. They stopped keeping a lot of the feasts. They stopped doing. They weren't what we would call Messianic Judaism, like we're talking about here today. So the concept of the Messianic Jewish movement didn't hardly exist back then. They weren't free to express openly until about the 1970s here in the United States is when we see this kind of become prominent. I would say it became predominant here in the United States. This is kind of like the birthplace of the movement. Now, it's certainly spread around the world and even into Israel. But even now in the USA is the epicenter of the Messianic Judaism movement. Wiki here claims that there are about 100 congregations that are Messianic Jewish in Israel, but 438 of the congregations are in the U.S. So there's a bigger contingent of Messianic Jews here in the U.S. than there are in Israel. They claim there are about 200,000 participants, I guess, in the U.S. and 20,000 in Israel. So again, 10 to 1 still in Israel. And the wiki page on this is the wiki page, I think, on Messianic Judaism, by the way. There's several photos of stuff. One of the photos they show is of a Messianic Jewish synagogue, they only show one Messianic Jewish synagogue in the wiki page. That Messianic Jewish synagogue is Baruch Hashem in Dallas.
Oh, wow.
So again, I think not only is the United States kind of an epicenter of this Messianic Jewish movement, there's a strong contingent of that specifically here in Texas, it seems. What did you say?
You said everything's bigger in Texas.
We're bigger in Texas, exactly. All five of the red heifers came from Texas too, right? So I'm telling you, I'm telling you, man, there is something happening, not just in the United States, but we're living real close to it here in Texas. And so we at Bat Zion are continuing that movement. We don't often have the opportunity to witness to Jews. There's just not that many of them around here. But 2 weeks ago, I was at A&M doing my thing, and I met some. I had my sign out 2 weeks ago. I hadn't used that sign since September. I got a lot of attention with that sign in September, and it got some criticism. But that sign says, "Jesus was a sinner, prove me wrong." And so they're going to come over. These Christians are going to come over. Well, no, he's not. He kept the law. He didn't sin. Oh, really? Is that your position? You're willing to stick with that, right? And then I've trapped them a little bit in their bad theology, because he declared all foods clean. They're like, wait, you declared all foods clean, and you waived away the penalty for adultery for the adulterous woman. He violated the Sabbath all over the place. I said, how do you reconcile that? Always silence. They're always stunned, right? And the first guy I met 2 weeks ago, when I presented it to him, I says, how is it that you didn't notice that contradiction until I just told you? Why didn't you see that yourself? Because any other book that you read with such an obvious contradiction, you would see it, right? The only book that mankind can read with and have those contradictions in and not see it is the Bible. And so I had that sign. I hadn't used that sign since last September because it was so controversial. But I said, I'm going to bring it out. 2 weeks ago, I brought it out. But also, it was a little bit cold, and I wanted to maybe stand out a little bit more, so I brought my tallit. I wore my tallit, which I had with me. I'd never put it on, but it was colder. Thought it would keep me warm. It didn't. It's too thin to keep me cold. It didn't help me at all. And I had the big one. My wife bought me one of the big ones like Tim's, but my shoulders are pretty narrow and slopey. It just kept falling off. So anyway, I was wearing it like a coat almost. But I had my keep on, too, and the other big seats hanging down. And so I looked very Jewish, I think, at that moment. And that caught the attention of some Jewish student organizations. And they were very offended. Yes. That did not happen in September. I don't know if none of the Jewish students walked by and saw it, or I don't know what happened. But this time, some Jews saw it. They became very offended. And one of the guys heckled me for 3 hours the whole time that I was there. He was the last person to leave. He stayed with me longer than anybody else. There was one Eastern Orthodox that stayed with me, but he wasn't there earlier. This guy was there early, and he stayed there the whole way till I left. And he virtually heckled me the whole time. And actually, he said, there's pictures of you going all over campus. Well, it wasn't all over campus. It was among those Jewish student organizations, I'm sure. And they had a gaggle of the Jewish group kind of over here about 12 feet away or so from me. And this one guy was kind of going and reporting to what I'm saying, and he would come back and heckle me some more, right? And I got to give him credit, though. He was heckling me, but it never became ugly. Which is hardly say, how can you heckle somebody without making it ugly? He did it. I got to give him credit for that. He was kind of smiling. I think he was laughing at me a little bit, right? But he's like, you're not a real Jew, And he's like, you're wearing your tallit all wrong, and you're wearing your this wrong, and that's wrong, and he got so loud at some point that I was trying to. And there was other Christians that were there because they were coming over. I had a dozen or so on and off Christians that I'm trying to talk to while he's over here heckling me. And there was some lady that was talking so quietly I could hardly hear what she's saying. I had to block off this heckling off this ear and try to listen to what she's saying. Another lady wanted to pray with me, and so we prayed, and she kind of saw the situation for what it was. It was very interesting. But I'd used that sign, again, only in last September twice, and I haven't used it since. But the second time that I used it last September, I met a guy named Joseph, a Christian. There wasn't any heckling going on back there. He seemed to be somewhat receptive, but he's a Christian. In fact, there's a Christian group that sets up a table. I don't know if they started doing this because of me, because I don't know if they were doing it before. But anyway, they set up a table over here, and they're actually a Christian student organization, so they can get a table put up over here. And the MSC puts the table for them. And they're just trying to actually witness. They put the sign up there, and they just write things on there. The one that they wrote just yesterday was, is there such a thing as absolute truth? And so they're trying to start a dialogue with anybody that was willing to talk. And they're going to, obviously, they're a Christian group, so they're going to want to try to present the gospel. And so I commend them for that. They're doing good. And in fact, yesterday, because yesterday I was there was a whole other student organization that was not connected with these guys, and they were setting up right in the place that I always set up. And they were kind of gathered together, they prayed, and then they kind of went off, I think, to evangelize. That's what it looked like to me. They were kind of pairing up, and then they were going off to, evangelize. Again, I haven't seen those guys before, so I don't know what's caused that. It seems like maybe there's a movement going that I'm part of, at least as the Messianic Jewish part. Huh? I'm stirring up the campus, man. Maybe so, because we've got a lot going on. This Joseph guy, he's at that table almost every Friday that I came by throughout the fall, and so I would talk to him a little bit, and I said, "Hey, I gave him a copy of my book back in September, and I don't know if he read it or not, but I'd ask him, hey, how, what do you think? How are you doing?" He's like, yeah, he's not so convinced. He's like, I'm not so sure about that. I don't agree with it, and he never really did present any strong arguments. And then I didn't see him. They were off for the December, and so then I just got back, and they were not there 2 weeks ago. But that guy was there again with his table just yesterday, and so I went by and said hi to him. I says, his name is Joseph. I said, I'm going to call you Yosef ben Yaakov. So I'm going to call you Yosef ben Yaakov because you're fighting with Elohim, right? You need to stop fighting with him, right? And then I walked over because, again, I was just a piece from where they were is where I normally set up. But he came over to me immediately after that. And he started talking to me he's like, yeah, this stuff makes sense.
Really?
Yeah, he's like, I started reading your book. And he's like, wow, this stuff really makes sense. He's totally on board with it.
No way.
I'm like, no way. And then I started talking to him and giving him some more advice, that's not in the book necessarily. And then I mentioned something out of the Acts 15, right? How we interpret Acts 15. Gentiles should be in the synagogue on the Sabbath to hear the Torah of Moses, right? And the fact that they need to stop, being bad people like the Romans were in Acts 15:20. And he didn't know that part. So I'm pretty sure he hasn't even read to the 4th chapter of the book yet. So I don't know what he's been doing since September, but somehow he managed to read maybe just 2 or 3 chapters of the book, and he's already totally on board. He's like, yeah, this makes sense. They created all these man-made rules and this and that, and that's not how we're saved. And I'm like, praise Yah, right? So that was really an encouraging thing to see. There might be some other guys that are on board, but they took my book and I haven't seen them again. But this guy, I was able to kind of meet again, so that was kind of neat. And I apologize maybe a little bit because today was not so much of a preaching day, more of a teaching, and more about kind of my personal journey, a little bit personal journey as I'm looking through the Scripture, and my personal journey here at the campus. So I've kind of invited you into my journey. And I'm sure you'll rejoice with me that even one would come to the knowledge of the truth. Amen. Shabbat shalom.